So yeah, good afternoon. My name is Sandeep Balan. My parents named me Sandeep. They lovingly call me Monu. My sister calls me Sandhu. My college friends call me Balan, Balu. My colleagues call me Sandy. Same guy, different names, and I didn't mind any of them, right? Because it kind of shows a deeper connect that you have when you call someone by your nickname. And I liked most of these names. In fact, all of them. But then there were names, I was called by, which obviously was not to my liking. Names that were made out to call out my skin color. Kaliye, Oi Kalu. The poetic bullies would go Kalve. Uh, the cricket enthusiastic bullies would go Ambrose, because I was always a tall kid, or some random West Indies players. Right? So, so here I was. So my dad was in a transferable job. So while I'm a Malayali from Kerala, I've never stayed there. I've done my schooling in Bombay, Assam, Gujarat, and most of the time, the majority of the crowd or classmates would be localites, mostly fair-skinned, right? So us dark-skinned people would be minorities, which is probably the reason why I was at the receiving end of most of it. So most of the days I would go back home crying, telling my mom, this is what I'm being subjected to. And mom would, in her own unique way, would tell me, this Lord Krishna ka color hai. He was also dark. I would say, कैसे वो तो blue color है, because we had a blue murti of Lord Krishna at home. I said, कहाँ उनका blue, कहाँ मेरा? And then Amma would say, you have the color of your dad, right? And you will grow up to be like him. Now that would console me a bit, because I really look up to my dad. He's an inspiration. He's laid the foundation for us to, dream from, right? So that would console me. But as a kid, next day the same cycle continues, and you go back to school. The same bullies kind of hound you. So it was, a cycle. And I have always had a logical brain, right? There's this funny instance I remember from childhood when, I had my sister who was a mirror image of my mother. She's fair. And mom would always bathe her with Johnson's baby soap. And I had peers. And, and when I would compare peers with my skin color, I would say, oh, this is exactly the same color as my skin. And I would attribute my skin color to peers. And I knew that this is the reason for my skin color, and I would demand that I also want Johnson's baby soap, because that would make me as fair as my mother and sister, right? How naive of me. But that was my psyche, right, back then, when, something that affects you, and you want to give it back, and every day you face such things. And that's what, kind of led me to, writing in the first place, which I'll talk, about briefly. What this did is, all these abuses kind of had me seething in anger, right? I wanted to give it back. I wanted to confront them. Abey, ye kala thodi hai, ye brown hai, chocolatey color hai, andha hai kya? One of the most recurring jokes that time would be how I had this superpower of turning invisible if the lights were switched off in a room. I was like, kaise yaar, fluorescent paint thodi hai, jo ekdam andhere mein chamkega. It's didn't make logic, but these were jokes which I was subjected to, right? So I wanted to confront these guys, and now that's where the second, I had a speech disorder back then, which would always put me on the back foot. I used to stutter a lot. I used to stammer really bad in school. Now again, that's a deadly combination. You want to confront, and you stammer is when you are on the back foot. You can't give it back to them. And I kind of was getting converted into an introvert. I was, keeping to myself. And that's when I started writing, because for me, I guess that was an outlet. I would write about random things. I would write, I would try to make sense of, simple things. I would scribble in my journey. I would write letters to imaginary friends, pen friends, and whatnot. And slowly, over a period of time, I started getting interested in writing, as such. Now, all this while, I would obviously, in school, you might remember, right? The teachers used to pick each one of you, and you had to read a paragraph each. Now, that was a time when I would have a lump in my throat. And because I was a tall kid, I would obviously not be in the front seat, thankfully. I would count the number of guys, and I would count the number of paragraphs. I would kind of repeat the lines again and again, because I would know the tricky words where I would get stuck. Try to, but when my turn comes, again, the same familiar feeling of the lump in my throat and my windpipe kind of choking for breath. And I couldn't. And at that moment, I could almost sense almost everyone laughing at me, in the class. And that, for a 10-year-old kid, it can't get more painful than that, right? So I devoted most of my time to writing. But now when I look back in hindsight, right, and as they say, like everything looks better in hindsight, I guess it was life's way of steering me towards a path that I would eventually take, right? Because if not for the stammering, right, I would not have developed an interest in writing. I would not have spent a lot of time writing, and back then what I used to do is I would spend an extra 5 minutes in bathroom. Okay, that sounded wrong, but what I would do is I would clean my tongue for 5 more minutes because I, like the same logical brain, thought that the thickness of the tongue was causing the stammering, right? So I would clean my tongue like more than a regular individual, then look back in the mirror, who had become my best friend by then, and I would obviously confidently speak a couple of words and think that, hey, you are good. Why do you have to fear to speak in front of a public? You should not fear public speaking. That was only the fourth guy after my appa, amma, and my sister who thought I was a normal guy. There was nothing wrong with me, right? And that friendship with that guy in the mirror continued over the next 10 years because this fear of stammering, was there with me till about my third year of engineering. And over these 10 years, I was writing, cooking up stories, thinking of mundane things. And in hindsight, if not for those mundane things that I was cooking up, I would never have thought of an idea like instant beer mix that I'm sure most of you might have received on WhatsApp, which is powder kholo, pani mein gholo, and beer ban jata, which was an April Fool's prank that we did, that I wrote last year. It was all over the place. Or the recent Sone ke paise milenge, 1 lakh for if you sleep for 9 hours every night for 100 nights. And that was again built out of, अरे क्या सोने के पैसे मिलेंगे? I thought, why not? हाँ, सोने के पैसे मिलेंगे for a mattress brand, right? So those stuff probably, in hindsight, I feel these were the instances where, the seeds of those were sown. So till my third year of engineering, I would probably, I was still a recluse, kind of an introvert. And then this guy in the mirror, who I had not unfriended, thankfully, told me that, hey, why don't you give public speaking a shot? And that was when I tried hosting a quiz event for the first time in my third year. And thankfully, nothing happened. The familiar lump in the throat was not there. I also felt that I had developed this methodology of thinking of an alternate word, to replace the word that I was having trouble with, and taking a dramatic pause in between and saying that word. So that way my vocabulary had increased, and I had found a hack to work around my stammering. And that was gone, right? And third year, fourth year, I then, it was like, Baan toot gaya. I was all over the place. I was, speaking. I was debating. I was giving presentations. Then I ended up doing an MBA, which is all about GDPI. If you're stammering, you obviously can't get through. I'm in a marketing, advertising professional where every day is talking to, pitching ideas, pitching, taking them through presentations, which thankfully I don't have today. So there again, so I grew out of that fear, and I guess it was. And if not for stammering, as I said, I would not have become the writer. So in hindsight, I'm grateful that this happened. Right now, back to the point of the abusing that I was, a part of. How did that help? Now, obviously, I had started writing. So since I couldn't give it back to all these guys who were kind of bullying me, I would go back home every day and write whatever I wanted to tell to them, right? Every single word with the cuss words. Right? Probably, I didn't even know subconsciously those were the first rants that I ever wrote before the ones that went viral in Half Day, Holiday, and all of that you guys might have watched. Now, what that did is, I felt that it was a seething anger within that was coming out. Because I could put myself in the shoes of someone who was at the receiving end, because having been at the receiving end of, abuses like that, creates that sympathy that you have towards someone who is subjected in a corner. Now that's when, I said those observations and all of that, which is where, when Pictures happened in 2015, it was all about the marketer in me thinking like a consumer of content that I was watching, thinking that someone who is like me, a millennial, would probably like content like Pictures. The name Pictures happened, and Pictures is where I learned about screenplay. Because till then I was writing plays in college, I was doing sketches and all of that, but I had never written a content as long as 2.5, 3 hours long. And Pictures kind of exposed me to the screenplay world. I felt, okay, minor tweaks in my writing, and I can actually attempt that. So it started with short films. I moved on to the first web series that I wrote was Rise, which stars Vikrant Masits on YouTube. If you guys can watch it. Now, I wrote it in 2017, and I was reading a lot about IT layoffs that was happening at that time, right? Manual testers were getting laid off, and I could feel the sympathy, right? I could put myself in their shoes. I knew how it felt to be cornered. And that's where I thought, why not, through my story, inspire them that if you lose a job, it's not the end of the world. I wanted to remind through my dialogues that life is not a 100-meter race, it's a marathon. And the milestone at 100 meters shouldn't define how your marathon will turn out to be, which was one of the dialogues in the series. And this is beautiful conversation between Vikrant's dad, Vikrant, who plays the lead character, who gets laid off in the first episode. He has this interaction with his dad, which I had written visualizing my father telling stuff to me. Now it had dialogues like, मायने ये नहीं रखता कि आप कितनी बार गिरे, मायने ये रखता है कि आप कितनी बार गिर के उठे. सपनों की कोई एक्सपायरी डेट नहीं होती. Then there were dialogues like, सपनों की बैलेंस शीट पे कभी फायदे और नुकसान का कॉलम मत रखना. That was a note to my MBA days where I couldn't balance the balance sheets. Right? And अपने बीते हुए कल को ढोते रहोगे तो आने वाले कल से गले कैसे मिलोगे? Right? So all of this was supposed to inspire those millions of or lakhs of people who were at the brink of being laid off. And that was the first time I wrote a rant, which was testers versus developers. Now I took the help of my brother-in-law, who was a manual tester back then, and he told me that this is not something that we choose, right? It's a random number generation, and we get sucked into becoming a manual tester for guys who have worked in IT, right? And I thought, why not use that as a pretext to give a rant? So I made a testers versus developers scene in that, where Vikrant Masi goes off on a rant saying, यार मेरी क्या गलती है कि मैं manual tester बना और मुझे निकाला developer को क्यों नहीं? So it goes on like that, right? And again that traveled. That was the first rant I wrote. Then my next web series, What's Your Status, when I was writing, I was sitting in office at 6 o'clock. There was this guy leaving office at 6, and he was facing me. I was sitting in a way that I could face him. And there was this guy who came from the back after a smoke break, and he comments, "Arey, half day." I'm like, wow, this is something that I have been subjected to for the last 12 years that I have been working. I went home that night. I wrote a scene which became a part of What's Your Status, which again standalone became a viral scene as well, of Aaj Fir Se Half Day. So it was all about giving it back. The number of smoke breaks that you take, the number of breaks that you take, discussing politics, cricket, and everything else, and compared to my half day, I'm leaving on time because I spent my 9 hours working, unlike you, who took probably 15 breaks, right? That went viral like how. And that was kind of the turning point. It was everywhere. My friends were writing in from Australia, Canada, Singapore, America. That everywhere on WhatsApp group, this clip was being shared. My dad shared it with me, saying, "देख office से time पे निकला कर." मैंने बोला, "पापा मैंने लिखा है." So he sent a reply back to the group where he got it. मेरे बेटे ने लिखा है. You know how proud he was. That had some cuss words as well, which I was not very proud of, but it needed that, right? Because it had to have that impact. It made its way into Z News, because I guess that highlighted a very deep-rooted corporate vice. That's what it did. It was all over the place. And around the same time, I guess one of the leading multinational companies declared that at 6 p.m. they will shut off the lights, right? And a lot of people attributed it to the rant, which I didn't mind. So it was all adding up, right? So Z News carried a whole segment in their daily news and analysis where they analyzed the half-day rant, and it was on TV, it was on digital, it was all over WhatsApp. And that made me feel that, okay, I can write something which can probably bring about a positive change. Because even in Rise, when I had written it, there were a lot of comments. More than the fact that it got screened at Sony Studios Hollywood, I took solace from the fact that there were a lot of people who wrote in the comments that I got laid off last week, but now I'm inspired to look ahead. It's not the end of the road for me, which for me was really inspiring. That actually motivated me to go on. So half day hua, then I thought, okay, what's the next corporate wise that I can take? I thought of, okay, there are moments when you want to take a leave for your friend's wedding and your boss obviously cancels your leave. I said, hey, there's that next rant that I can write on, the holiday rant, which ended with boss bano, bhagwan mat bano. And that again was all over the place. It went viral like crazy, and the same effect, like the same domino effect, because I realized that, on digital, you may not say those things, right? I may have always wanted to tell my boss, ki abbe mere ko chutti de, and say a lot more, which obviously is there in the rant, but I can always put that on Facebook, saying, ye main nahi bol raha hu, yaar, ye bol raha hai. But I agree, and a lot of people wrote in after half day that and when anyone comments half day, and hopefully the comments have reduced since then, I always show them this video. Right, so that again, holiday went viral. Now, when a lot of people asked me, right, I got one comment after holiday. Someone said that if corporate world was a country, I would be its prime minister. I felt good that, because I was taking this one corporate wise at a time. Right now, that's when, I kind of, realized that my scenes are kind of making a positive impact, right? And then someone asked me, what is that magic ingredient that you have, that each of your rants that you write end up going so viral? I always felt till about 2 years back that it's the fact that I have worked in a corporate and have gone through it, which makes it so relatable. But then I saw Gully Boy, and that there was a dialogue there, by MC Sher. तेरे अंदर का लावा फट के बाहर आने दे. And then I realized that's what was happening. All the anger that was seething for the last 20 odd years, was the magic ingredient. I was pouring it all in. Because when we writers write stories, right, it's like a horcrux. We leave a part of our soul in those stories, right? I'm a waterhead, yes, so that gives it away, right? It kind of leaves, you leave a part of your soul in those stories and you put yourself in those shoes. And that makes that very personal, right? That makes your rant really powerful. And when users see it, they put themselves in the shoes of the character, and that's why they share, right? And that's what was happening. I realized all those years of seething in anger obviously is put to good use, and that's what hindsight did, because in hindsight it all added up, right? And that probably was life's way of steering me in a direction which life wanted me to take, which I would never have known, I would take, right? And that's what falling upwards is, because while 20 years back I was falling every now and then, I was obviously not falling down, I was falling upwards, right? And I wish I could write a letter to my 10-year-old self, right? That none of those abuses matter. Like none of what any one of those guys say matters, because years from now, all that will matter is that your family and your extended family will still love you, support you, and will let you go behind your dreams. You will have friends, you will have great friends who will pay for attending your talk, right? And there are a few of them in the audience, and you will probably marry the most beautiful woman in the world. You will have a lovely little son, and who will teach you the meaning of true love. You will see his eyes twinkle with joy every time he sees you. My son, he has his mother's eyes, but he has my color. And I love the fact that God has chosen it to be that way. I wouldn't have it any other way either. Thank you.